The early morning sun painted the quiet streets of Beverly Hills in golden light as Marcus Rodriguez stepped out of his large White House. He wore simple blue jeans and a plain black t-shirt that stretched across his massive chest and shoulders. Marcus was not an ordinary man by any measure. Standing 6 feet and 3 inches tall with arms like tree trunks and hands that could crush steel cans without effort, he looked like he could lift a car over his head. His dark hair was still messy from sleep, and his brown eyes held a gentleness that most people never expected to see in someone so physically powerful. But Marcus was not stepping out for his usual morning workout or to drive his expensive sports car. Instead, he was reaching for 2 special leashes that hung by his front door. These leashes belonged to his 2 most precious companions in the world. As he called their names softly, the sound of paws clicking on the marble floor echoed through the house. First came Bruno, a beautiful German shepherd with golden and black fur that shined in the morning light. Bruno walked with a slight hop because he only had 3 legs. His right front leg had been removed 2 years ago, but this did not slow him down one bit. His tail wagged with pure joy as he saw Marcus holding his blue leather leash. Bruno's eyes sparkled with intelligence and love as he sat patiently waiting for his harness to be attached. Right behind Bruno came Bella, a chocolate-brown Labrador mix with the softest fur anyone had ever touched. Bella moved carefully but confidently through the house, using her nose and memory to guide her way. She had been born completely blind, but her other senses were incredibly sharp. She could hear Marcus breathing from across the room and knew exactly where he was standing. Her tail wagged just as happily as Bruno's as she felt Marcus gently place her red harness around her chest. Marcus knelt down on one knee and wrapped his huge arms around both dogs, giving them the morning hug they looked forward to every single day. Bruno licked his face with a tongue that felt like sandpaper, while Bella nuzzled her head against his shoulder, making small happy sounds in her throat. These 2 dogs were not just pets to Marcus. They were his family, his best friends, and his greatest teachers about what real love looked like. 2 years ago, Marcus had walked into the Beverly Hills Animal Rescue Center looking for a guard dog to protect his home. He was famous for playing tough guys and action heroes in Hollywood movies, and he thought he needed a fierce dog to match his image. But when he saw Bruno lying sadly in a small cage, missing his front leg, and ignored by everyone who walked by, something inside Marcus's heart broke open. The shelter worker told him that Bruno had been a police dog who lost his leg while saving a little girl from a burning house. The brave dog had refused to leave the building until the child was safe, even when the roof started to fall down around them. Marcus adopted Bruno that very same day. 3 months later, he returned to the same shelter and found Bella. She had been returned by 3 different families because they said her blindness made her too much trouble. But Marcus saw something special in the way Bella lifted her head when she heard his voice. He saw courage and hope in a dog that had every reason to give up on humans completely. Now, as Marcus attached their leashes and opened his front door, both dogs practically vibrated with excitement. This was their favorite time of day. The morning walk was their special time together, away from the noise of movie sets and the chaos of Hollywood life. It was just Marcus, Bruno, and Bella exploring their neighborhood and enjoying the simple pleasure of being together. The morning air was cool and fresh as they stepped onto the sidewalk. Bruno immediately started sniffing everything in sight, his tail creating a happy rhythm in the air. Bella walked close to Marcus's left side, occasionally bumping his leg gently to make sure he was still there. She had learned to trust him completely to guide her safely through the world. As they walked down the tree-lined street toward the local park, Marcus felt the stress of his busy life melting away. Tomorrow he would be back on a movie set, performing dangerous stunts and pretending to be someone tough and fearless. But right now, walking with his 2 special dogs in the quiet morning light, Marcus Rodriguez was exactly who he wanted to be. He was simply a man who loved his dogs more than anything else in the world. The peaceful morning walk continued as Marcus and his 2 dogs made their way down Maple Street toward the small neighborhood park. Bruno hopped along happily on his three legs, stopping every few steps to investigate interesting smells left behind by other dogs. Bella walked steadily beside Marcus, her nose working overtime to take in all the wonderful scents that painted a picture of the world around her. The morning was perfect, with birds singing in the tall oak trees and a gentle breeze carrying the sweet smell of blooming flowers from nearby gardens. As they approached the corner where Sunset Coffee Shop sat with its bright yellow awning and outdoor tables, Marcus noticed several people already enjoying their morning coffee and pastries. Some were reading newspapers while others chatted quietly with friends. A few customers recognized Marcus and gave him friendly waves, which he returned with a warm smile. He was known in this neighborhood not as a famous movie star, but simply as the nice man who always walked his special dogs and treated everyone with kindness. Bruno had just found a particularly interesting spot near a fire hydrant when a loud, aggressive sound shattered the peaceful morning atmosphere. The deep rumbling of a powerful motorcycle engine echoed off the buildings as a shiny black bike turned the corner at high speed. The motorcycle was clearly expensive, with chrome parts that gleamed in the sunlight and custom paint that looked like it had cost thousands of dollars. But it was being ridden with no respect for the quiet neighborhood or the people trying to enjoy their peaceful morning. The bike came to a sudden stop right in front of the coffee shop, its engine revving unnecessarily loud before finally shutting off. The silence that followed felt almost as jarring as the noise had been. Every person sitting at the outdoor tables turned to look at the rider, and not with admiration. Several people shook their heads in annoyance at having their quiet breakfast interrupted by such unnecessary noise and drama. From the motorcycle stepped a man who seemed to believe the whole world should stop and notice him. Jake Morrison was 32 years old, but acted like a teenager trying to impress his friends. He wore black leather pants that squeaked when he walked, and a matching leather jacket covered in silver studs and chains. His arms were covered in tattoos that seemed designed more to shock people than to mean anything important. His blonde hair was slicked back with so much gel it looked like plastic, and he wore dark sunglasses even though the morning sun was still gentle and not too bright. Jake pulled off his helmet and shook his hair dramatically, as if he expected everyone to applaud his arrival. He looked around at the coffee shop customers with a smug smile that suggested he thought he was the most important person in the neighborhood. His black leather boots had metal decorations that clicked loudly on the sidewalk as he walked, making sure everyone continued to pay attention to him. It was at that moment that Jake's eyes fell on Marcus and his two dogs. Bruno was still investigating the fire hydrant area, balancing carefully on his three legs as he moved around the small space. Bella stood patiently next to Marcus, her head tilted slightly as she listened to all the new sounds and smells that had arrived with the motorcycle. Both dogs were completely innocent and peaceful, simply enjoying their morning walk with the person they loved most in the world. But Jake Morrison was not the kind of person who saw innocence and peace as good things. Instead, he saw what he thought was an opportunity to make himself feel bigger and more important by making someone else feel small. His eyes narrowed as he focused on Bruno's missing leg and Bella's cloudy, unseeing eyes. A cruel smile spread across his face as an idea formed in his mind. Without any warning or provocation, Jake began to laugh. It was not a happy laugh or even a normal laugh. It was the kind of harsh, mocking laugh that bullies use when they think they have found an easy target. The sound cut through the morning air like a knife, causing several coffee shop customers to look up from their breakfast with concerned expressions. Jake pointed directly at Bruno and Bella, making sure his gesture was big and obvious enough for everyone around to see. His voice was loud and deliberately cruel as he prepared to turn a peaceful morning into something ugly and hurtful. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything for everyone involved. Jake Morrison's cruel laughter grew louder and more obnoxious as he stepped closer to Marcus and his two dogs. His heavy leather boots made sharp clicking sounds on the concrete sidewalk, and the metal decorations on his jacket jingled with each exaggerated movement he made. He was clearly enjoying the attention his loud arrival had created, and now he wanted to put on an even bigger show for everyone watching. "Well, "Well, well," Jake said in a voice dripping with fake sympathy and real cruelty. "Look what we have here, folks." He gestured dramatically toward Bruno and Bella like a circus ringmaster introducing a freak show. "Ladies and gentlemen, feast your eyes on the saddest dog-walking parade in all of Beverly Hills." Bruno looked up from his exploration near the fire hydrant, his intelligent brown eyes curious about this new person who was speaking so loudly. His tail gave a small, friendly wag, because Bruno had never met a human he did not like. Bella turned her head toward the sound of Jake's voice, her sensitive ears picking up the harsh tone, even though she could not see the cruel expression on his face. Jake pointed directly at Bruno's missing front leg and let out another burst of harsh laughter. "Hey everybody, check out this three-legged wonder. I bet he tips over every time he tries to lift his leg to pee." Several people sitting at the coffee shop tables looked uncomfortable and embarrassed by Jake's behavior, but he was too caught up in his own performance to notice their disapproval. The leather-clad bully then turned his attention to Bella, who was standing quietly next to Marcus with her head tilted in that gentle way that blind dogs do when they are trying to understand their surroundings through sound and smell. "And look at this one," Jake announced, his voice getting even louder and more theatrical. "She cannot even see where she is going. I bet she walks into walls all day long and probably falls downstairs every chance she gets." Marcus felt his jaw muscles tighten and his hands slowly curl into fists the size of small boulders. His 15 years of action movie training had taught him exactly how to handle bullies like Jake, but his 15 years of loving rescue animals had taught him something even more important about staying calm and protecting those who could not protect themselves. He took a deep breath and gently moved closer to his dogs, placing his massive frame between them and the cruel stranger. But Jake was nowhere near finished with his ugly performance. He started walking in exaggerated circles around Marcus and the dogs, making loud comments designed to hurt and humiliate. "I have seen some pathetic sights in my time," he announced to the growing crowd of onlookers, "but this takes the prize. Who in their right mind keeps broken dogs like these alive?" Jake then did something that made several people in the crowd gasp with shock and disgust. He began to imitate Bruno's three-legged walk, hopping around on the sidewalk in a mocking dance that was both cruel and childish. He made exaggerated limping motions and pretended to lose his balance, all while laughing at his own terrible joke. "Look at me, I am a brave three-legged hero dog," Jake said in a baby voice that was meant to sound ridiculous. "I hop around like a broken toy that nobody wants to play with anymore." But Jake was not done with his performance. He then covered his eyes with his hands and began stumbling around the sidewalk, pretending to be Bella. He walked into a trash can on purpose and acted like it was the funniest thing in the world. "Oops, I cannot see where I am going because I am a useless blind mutt," he said in that same mocking baby voice. The crowd of coffee shop customers and passersby had grown larger, and many people were now pulling out their phones to record what was happening. Some were shaking their heads in disgust at Jake's behavior, while others looked angry that someone would be so cruel to innocent animals and their owner. Marcus remained perfectly still and calm, but inside his chest, his heart was beating like a war drum. His protective instincts were screaming at him to act, but his wisdom was telling him to wait for the right moment. Bruno and Bella pressed closer to his legs, sensing that something was wrong but trusting completely in their human to keep them safe. Jake Morrison had no idea that he was about to learn a lesson about what real strength and real toughness actually looked like. Marcus Rodriguez stood perfectly still as Jake Morrison continued his cruel performance in front of the growing crowd. The morning sun seemed to shine brighter on Marcus's calm face, highlighting the controlled strength in his dark eyes and the gentle way his huge hands rested protectively near his two dogs. Despite his massive size and the obvious power in his muscled frame, Marcus radiated the kind of peaceful confidence that only comes from true inner strength. Bruno and Bella had both moved closer to Marcus's legs, not because they were afraid, but because they could sense the tension in the air around them. Bruno's intelligent eyes looked back and forth between his beloved owner and the loud stranger who was making such ugly sounds. Bella's sensitive nose was working overtime, picking up the scent of anger and aggression that was coming from Jake, along with the calm, protective energy that always surrounded Marcus when his family was threatened. The crowd of onlookers had grown to more than 20 people, including coffee shop customers, people walking their own dogs, and joggers who had stopped to see what all the commotion was about. Many of them looked embarrassed and uncomfortable watching Jake's childish display, while others appeared genuinely angry that someone would be so cruel to disabled animals and their owner. Several people were recording everything with their phones, though Jake was too caught up in his own performance to notice or care. Marcus took a slow, deep breath and made a decision. He would try reasoning with this bully before the situation got any worse. His voice, when he finally spoke, was calm and steady, but it carried the kind of quiet authority that made people stop and listen. "These dogs are perfect exactly the way they are," Marcus said, his words clear and strong enough for everyone in the crowd to hear. Jake stopped his mocking dance and turned to face Marcus with a surprised expression, as if he had not expected his victim to speak back. But his surprise quickly turned back into cruel amusement. "Oh, really?" Jake said with an exaggerated gasp. "The dog lover wants to have a conversation. This should be entertaining." Marcus ignored Jake's sarcasm and continued speaking in that same calm, dignified voice. Bruno lost his leg while saving a child from a house fire. He was a police dog who chose to risk his own life rather than leave an innocent little girl in danger. The firefighters said he could have escaped to safety, but he stayed in that burning building until the child was rescued. For just a moment, Jake's mocking smile flickered as if he was not sure how to respond to this information. But his need to look tough and important in front of the crowd was stronger than any sense of decency he might have had left. "Oh, boo-hoo," Jake said, wiping fake tears from his eyes. "Now we are getting the sad backstory. What is next? Are you going to tell me they have their own television show?" Marcus felt his protective instincts growing stronger, but he maintained his composure and continued. "Bella was born blind, but she became a certified therapy dog. She visits children's hospitals and nursing homes, bringing comfort and joy to sick people who need a friend. She has probably done more good in her short life than most humans do in their entire lifetime." The crowd was listening intently to Marcus's words, and several people nodded in approval and respect. One older woman wiped tears from her eyes as she looked at Bella with new understanding and admiration. A young father lifted his small daughter onto his shoulders so she could see the special dogs better, and a little girl waved at Bruno, who wagged his tail in response. But Jake Morrison was not moved by these touching stories. If anything, they seemed to make him more determined to be cruel and hurtful. "Wow, what a heartbreaking tale," he said in a voice dripping with fake emotion. "But you know what I see when I look at these mutts? I see damaged goods that should have been put out of their misery a long time ago." The crowd gasped at Jake's words, and several people made sounds of disgust and anger. One man in a business suit shook his head and said loudly, "That is completely inappropriate and cruel." A woman walking her own small dog called out, "Leave them alone, you bully." But Jake was feeding off the attention, both positive and negative, and he was not ready to stop his performance. He took a step closer to Bruno and Bella, his leather boots making sharp sounds on the concrete. "Maybe I should help put these poor creatures out of their misery," he said with a nasty grin that made several people in the crowd take involuntary steps backward. Marcus felt something change inside his chest, like a switch being flipped from patience to protection mode. His breathing became deeper and more controlled, and his massive hands slowly began to curl into fists. He had tried reasoning with this bully, had tried showing him the dignity and worth of his beloved dogs, but Jake Morrison had just crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. The morning air seemed to grow thicker with tension as Marcus took one slow step forward, placing himself directly between Jake and his dogs. For the first time since this confrontation began, Jake seemed to realize that he might have pushed too far, but his pride and his need to look tough in front of the crowd would not let him back down now. The stage was set for a showdown that would teach everyone present what real strength and real courage actually looked like. The tension in the air was so thick it felt like everyone could reach out and touch it. Marcus stood like a mountain of controlled power between Jake and his two precious dogs, his calm exterior hiding the storm of protective fury building inside him. The crowd of onlookers had grown even larger, with people stepping out of shops and stopping their cars to see what was causing such a commotion on the usually peaceful street. Jake Morrison was still grinning with cruel satisfaction, completely unaware that he was about to discover just how badly he had misjudged the situation. He reached toward Bruno as if he was going to push the three-legged dog, his leather-gloved hand moving slowly and deliberately to make sure everyone could see what he was planning to do. "Let us see if this crippled mutt can stay standing when someone gives him a little help," Jake said, his voice full of malicious glee. Several people in the crowd shouted no and stop that, but Jake was too caught up in his own cruelty to listen to their protests. But just as Jake's hand was about to make contact with Bruno, a woman near the front of the crowd suddenly gasped so loudly that everyone turned to look at her. She was a middle-aged lady with silver hair who had been drinking coffee at one of the outdoor tables when Jake's loud motorcycle had interrupted her peaceful morning. Now she was staring at Marcus with wide eyes full of recognition and excitement. "Oh my goodness," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet crowd. "That is Marcus Rodriguez. The Marcus Rodriguez." She grabbed the arm of the man sitting next to her and shook it excitedly. "Do you know who that is? That is the action movie star. He was in Steel Fist and Urban Warrior and about a dozen other movies." The news spread through the crowd like electricity, jumping from person to person. "Marcus Rodriguez," someone whispered, and then others began to whisper the name too. "The guy who does all his own stunts," another person said with growing excitement. "He is supposed to be incredibly strong in real life, not just in the movies." People began pulling out their phones even faster now, but this time they were not just recording a neighborhood argument. They were recording a confrontation involving one of Hollywood's biggest action stars. The energy in the crowd shifted from simple curiosity to genuine excitement and anticipation. "I saw him in that movie where he fought off 20 bad guys at once," a teenage boy said to his friend. "And I heard he really knows martial arts and everything. This is going to be epic." But Jake Morrison was so focused on tormenting Bruno and Bella that he had not heard any of the whispered conversations happening around him. He was still reaching toward Bruno with that same cruel smile on his face, completely unaware that he was about to pick a fight with someone who made his living being tough and dangerous on movie screens around the world. Marcus heard the whispers and recognition from the crowd, but he did not care about his celebrity status at that moment. All he cared about was protecting his dogs from this heartless bully. However, he realized that being recognized might actually help him handle this situation in a way that would teach Jake a lesson without anyone getting physically hurt. "I think you should stop right there," Marcus said, his voice now carrying the same commanding tone he used when playing military commanders and police captains in his films. The sound was deep and authoritative, and it made Jake freeze with his hand still extended toward Bruno. For the first time since this whole confrontation began, Jake actually looked directly at Marcus's face instead of just focusing on the dogs. What he saw there made him take an involuntary step backward. Marcus's dark eyes held a combination of controlled anger and absolute determination that suggested this was not a man who would be easily intimidated or pushed around. "You heard the lady," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger and more confident. "My name is Marcus Rodriguez, and I make movies for a living. Action movies where I play guys who do not like bullies and who protect innocent people and animals from jerks who think they can hurt whoever they want." Jake's face was beginning to show the first signs of uncertainty and fear, but his pride would not let him back down in front of so many people. "I do not care if you are some muscle-bound pretty boy from Hollywood," Jake said, though his voice was not nearly as confident as it had been just minutes earlier. "Your mutts are still pathetic freaks, and so are you for keeping them around." The crowd made sounds of anger and disgust at Jake's continued cruelty, and several people began shouting things like, "Leave him alone," and "Those dogs are beautiful." But Marcus raised one massive hand, and the crowd immediately became quiet, waiting to see what the famous action star would do next. Marcus reached slowly into his back pocket and pulled out his leather wallet. He opened it and held up his driver's license so Jake could see his name and picture clearly. "Like I said, my name is Marcus Rodriguez. I have been making action movies for 15 years, and I have learned a lot about dealing with bullies and cowards like you." Jake's face went pale as he finally realized who he was dealing with, but the damage was already done. He had gone too far to back down now, and everyone was watching to see what would happen next. The recognition had changed everything, and both men knew that this confrontation was about to reach its climax. The crowd held its collective breath as Marcus Rodriguez stood face to face with Jake Morrison, the tension so thick it seemed to press against everyone watching. Jake's face had gone from pale to almost white as the reality of his situation finally sank in. He was not just picking on some random dog owner anymore. He was confronting one of Hollywood's most famous action stars, a man who had built his career playing heroes who fought against exactly the kind of bully that Jake had revealed himself to be. But what happened next surprised everyone in the crowd, including Jake himself. Instead of using his obvious physical advantages to intimidate or overpower the leather-clad bully, Marcus did something completely unexpected. He slowly knelt down on one knee beside Bruno and Bella, his massive frame folding gracefully as he placed gentle hands on both of his beloved dogs. "Let me tell you the real story about these two heroes," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent crowd. His tone was calm and dignified, but it held a power that commanded absolute attention from everyone present. Even Jake seemed unable to look away or interrupt as Marcus began to speak. "This is Bruno," Marcus said, gently stroking the German Shepherd's golden and black fur. 2 years ago, he was working as a police dog in downtown Los Angeles when a terrible fire broke out in an apartment building. There was a 5-year-old girl trapped on the 3rd floor, and the firefighters could not reach her because of falling debris and dangerous smoke. The crowd leaned in closer, completely captivated by Marcus's story. Several people put away their phones and just listened, drawn in by the sincerity and emotion in the famous actor's voice. Even some of the coffee shop customers who had been sitting far away stood up and moved closer to hear better. Bruno could have stayed safe outside with the other emergency responders, Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger with pride and emotion. But when he heard that little girl crying for help, he broke away from his handler and ran straight into that burning building. He found her hiding under a bed, too scared and too overcome by smoke to move. Jake stood frozen in place, his cruel smile completely gone now, replaced by an expression of growing discomfort and uncertainty. He had expected a fight or at least an argument, but he had not prepared for this kind of response. Marcus was not attacking him or even raising his voice. Instead, he was doing something much more powerful. He was showing everyone present what real heroism looked like. Bruno carried that little girl on his back down 3 flights of stairs while the building was collapsing around them. Marcus said, his voice filled with admiration for his brave dog. A burning piece of wood fell on his front leg and crushed it so badly that it had to be removed. But he never let go of that child, not even when he was in terrible pain. He saved her life, and the doctor said she would not have survived another 5 minutes in that smoke. Several people in the crowd were now wiping tears from their eyes, and the teenage boy who had been excited about seeing a fight was now looking at Bruno with complete awe and respect. The 3-legged German Shepherd seemed to sense that everyone was talking about him, and his tail wagged proudly as he looked up at Marcus with absolute love and trust. "And this beautiful girl is Bella," Marcus said, turning his attention to the chocolate-brown Labrador mix, who was sitting patiently beside him. She was born completely blind, but that did not stop her from becoming one of the most important members of our community. She is a certified therapy dog who visits children's hospitals, nursing homes, and schools for special needs kids. Marcus gently lifted Bella's head so the crowd could see her cloudy, unseeing eyes and the gentle expression on her face. This amazing dog spends her days bringing comfort and joy to people who are sick, lonely, or scared. Children who are fighting cancer smile and laugh when Bella visits their hospital rooms. Elderly people who have not spoken in months will suddenly start talking when she rests her head in their laps. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word Marcus spoke. Even Jake seemed to be listening despite himself, though his face showed he was becoming more uncomfortable with each passing moment. This was not going the way he had planned at all. Bella cannot see the tears on a child's face, but she can sense their sadness and fear. Marcus continued, his voice full of love and respect for his special dog. She cannot see the loneliness in an elderly person's eyes, but she knows exactly how to make them feel less alone. She has brought more healing and happiness into this world than most people do in their entire lives. Marcus slowly stood up to his full height, Bruno and Bella flanking him on either side like loyal guardians. When he looked at Jake again, his expression was not angry or threatening. Instead, it was filled with disappointment and sadness for someone who could look at such beautiful, brave animals and see only things to mock and hurt. "So when you look at my dogs and call them broken or damaged," Marcus said quietly, "what you are really showing everyone here is how broken and damaged your own heart must be. Because anyone with a good heart would look at Bruno and Bella and see exactly what they are. They are heroes." The silence that followed Marcus's powerful words was so complete that the only sounds were the gentle morning breeze rustling through the oak trees and the distant hum of traffic from the main street. Jake Morrison stood frozen in place, his leather jacket suddenly feeling too tight, and his confident smirk completely wiped from his face. For the first time in years, he found himself at a complete loss for words. The crowd around them had transformed from curious onlookers into an audience that was clearly and completely on Marcus's side. People were nodding in agreement with everything the famous actor had said, and many were looking at Jake with expressions of disgust and disappointment. The energy had shifted dramatically, and Jake was beginning to realize that he was no longer the one in control of this situation. Marcus was not finished delivering his lesson. He stood tall and confident, with Bruno and Bella by his side like living proof of everything he had just said about courage, loyalty, and the true meaning of strength. When he spoke again, his voice carried the same commanding presence he brought to his most powerful movie roles. But this was not acting. This was real passion and real conviction. "You want to know what real strength looks like," Marcus said, his dark eyes fixed directly on Jake's uncomfortable face. "Real strength is not about having the loudest motorcycle or the most leather clothing, or making other people feel small so you can feel big. Real strength is about lifting people up instead of tearing them down." Several people in the crowd began to murmur their agreement, and someone called out, "That is right," from the back of the group. Jake looked around nervously, realizing that every single person watching this confrontation was now against him. His plan to humiliate someone else for his own entertainment had backfired completely. "Real strength is taking care of those who need help instead of picking on them," Marcus continued, his voice growing more powerful with each word. "Real strength is showing kindness when others show cruelty, and having the courage to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves." Jake tried to regain some of his earlier confidence by puffing out his chest and crossing his arms, but the gesture looked weak and desperate now. "Whatever, man," he said, but his voice cracked slightly. "I do not need a lecture from some Hollywood pretty boy about what makes someone tough." But Marcus was ready for this response. He took one step closer to Jake, and suddenly the bully seemed much smaller than he had just minutes earlier. "You think I am just a pretty boy," Marcus said with a slight smile that held no warmth. "But let me tell you something about this pretty boy. I have been training in martial arts for 20 years. I can bench press 400 pounds and deadlift 600. I do all my own stunts in my movies because I am actually tough enough to handle them." The crowd was listening with fascination as Marcus continued. But you know what makes me most proud of my strength? It is not what I can lift or how many fights I have won in movies. It is the fact that I use my strength to protect animals like Bruno and Bella instead of hurting them. I use my fame and my voice to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves." Jake's face was now bright red with embarrassment and anger. He could feel everyone staring at him with disapproval, and he knew that videos of his cruel behavior were probably already being shared on social media. His reputation in the neighborhood was ruined, and he had no one to blame but himself. "These dogs have more courage in their hearts than you have shown here today," Marcus said, kneeling down again to put his arms around Bruno and Bella. "Bruno runs and plays and lives a full, happy life on 3 legs. He does not spend his time feeling sorry for himself or making excuses. He just loves life and spreads joy wherever he goes." Bruno's tail wagged enthusiastically, as if he understood every word Marcus was saying about him. Several people in the crowd smiled, and some even applauded the brave 3-legged dog. "And Bella navigates the world with love and trust, even though she cannot see it," Marcus continued. "She does not let her blindness make her bitter or cruel. Instead, she uses her other senses and her incredible heart to bring happiness to everyone she meets. She is braver and stronger than most people I know." Bella seemed to sense that she was being talked about in a positive way, and she nuzzled closer to Marcus's side, her tail wagging gently. The crowd made soft sounds of approval and affection for the beautiful blind dog. Marcus stood up one more time and looked directly at Jake with an expression that was both challenging and disappointing. "So if you want to call someone pathetic and broken," he said quietly, "maybe you should look in a mirror, because the only pathetic thing I see here today is a grown man who gets his kicks from trying to hurt innocent animals and their owner." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers, with people calling out things like, "Well said," and "You tell him, Marcus." Jake looked around desperately, realizing that he had become the villain in his own story, and everyone present was celebrating his defeat. Jake Morrison's face had gone from red to almost purple as the reality of his complete humiliation sank in. The crowd that had gathered around the confrontation was now openly applauding Marcus's words and showing their support for the famous actor and his 2 special dogs. People were smiling and nodding, and several were taking pictures with Bruno and Bella, who seemed to enjoy all the positive attention they were receiving. The transformation in the crowd's energy was remarkable. What had started as shocked disapproval of Jake's cruel behavior had turned into genuine admiration and respect for Marcus's dignified response. Children were pointing excitedly at Bruno and asking their parents if they could pet the brave 3-legged dog. Elderly people were wiping tears from their eyes as they looked at Bella with new understanding of what therapy dogs could accomplish. Jake tried desperately to regain some control of the situation, but every word that came out of his mouth only made things worse for him. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice high and defensive. "I do not have to stand here and listen to this garbage from some actor who thinks he is better than everyone else." But before Jake could say anything more, a woman in the crowd stepped forward. She was wearing scrubs, clearly a nurse or doctor on her way to work, and her face was filled with anger at what she had witnessed. "I work at Children's Hospital," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I have seen therapy dogs like Bella bring comfort to dying children when nothing else could reach them. What you did here today was not just cruel, it was evil." Other people in the crowd began to speak up as well. An older man with a military bearing stepped forward and said, "I served with police dogs in the army. What that German shepherd did, running into a burning building to save a child, that is the kind of heroism most humans never show. You should be ashamed of yourself." A young mother holding her toddler's hand added her voice to the growing chorus of disapproval. "My daughter is afraid of most dogs, but she would love to meet Bella. Dogs like her teach children about kindness and acceptance. You have no idea how much good these animals do in the world." Jake looked around frantically as more and more people shared their thoughts about his behavior. A teenage girl said, "I have been following Marcus Rodriguez on social media for years, and all he ever posts about is helping rescue animals. He is like the nicest celebrity ever." An elderly woman added, "Those dogs are obviously loved and well cared for. Anyone with eyes can see how happy and healthy they are." The final blow to Jake's already destroyed pride came when a little girl, no more than 6 years old, tugged on her father's sleeve and said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "Daddy, why was that mean man being so nasty to the nice doggies? They did not do anything wrong." Her innocent question cut through all of Jake's attempts at justification and laid bare the simple truth that even a child could understand. Jake's leather jacket was now soaked with sweat, and his carefully styled hair was falling into his face. He realized that there was no way to salvage his reputation or his pride from this disaster. Every single person present thought he was a cruel bully, and worse, they were right. He had picked on innocent animals and their loving owner for no reason other than his own entertainment, and now he was paying the price for his cruelty. Marcus watched Jake's growing discomfort with a mixture of satisfaction and genuine sadness. He took no joy in seeing another human being humiliated, but he was glad that his dogs had been defended and that the crowd had learned something important about judging others based on their differences. "You know what the saddest part of all this is?" Marcus said, his voice now gentle rather than challenging. "Bruno and Bella still do not understand why you were being mean to them. They do not have it in their hearts to be cruel or judgmental the way humans can be. Even after everything you said and did, if you knelt down and spoke kindly to them, they would probably lick your face and try to be your friend." This observation seemed to hit Jake harder than any of the earlier criticisms. He looked down at Bruno and Bella, who were indeed looking at him, with curious, friendly expressions despite everything that had happened. Their innocence and forgiveness in the face of his cruelty made his behavior seem even more shameful and inexcusable. Jake mumbled something under his breath that might have been an apology, but it was too quiet and too late to matter. He stumbled backward toward his motorcycle, his confident swagger completely gone, replaced by the awkward movements of someone who just wanted to escape from a situation that had spiraled completely out of control. As Jake Morrison fumbled with his motorcycle keys, his hands shaking with embarrassment and his face burning with shame, Marcus Rodriguez stood tall and confident with Bruno and Bella by his side. The morning sun seemed to shine brighter on the three of them, as if nature itself was celebrating the victory of kindness over cruelty, love over hate, and dignity over bullying. The crowd had grown even larger during the confrontation, with people streaming out of nearby shops and businesses to see what was happening. Word had spread quickly through the neighborhood that Marcus Rodriguez, the famous action star, was involved in some kind of incident, but what people found when they arrived was so much more meaningful than celebrity gossip. They found a real-life lesson about what it means to be truly strong and truly brave. Jake finally managed to start his motorcycle, the engine roaring to life with the same loud, aggressive sound that had announced his arrival. But now, instead of making him seem tough and important, the noise just seemed desperate and pathetic. He was clearly eager to escape from the scene of his complete humiliation, but Marcus was not quite ready to let him leave without one final lesson. "Wait," Marcus called out, his voice carrying easily over the sound of the motorcycle engine. Jake looked back over his shoulder, his face still red with embarrassment, clearly hoping he could just drive away and forget this whole disaster had ever happened. "Next time you see someone who is different from you," Marcus said, his words clear and strong enough for everyone in the crowd to hear, "maybe try kindness instead of cruelty. You might learn something important about what really matters in life." The crowd burst into applause and cheers, with people whistling and calling out things like, "Well said, Marcus," and "That is exactly right." Jake revved his engine louder, trying to drown out the sound of everyone celebrating his defeat, but it was no use. The lesson had been delivered, witnessed, and would be remembered long after he was gone. As Jake finally drove away, his motorcycle disappearing around the corner with a roar of frustrated engines, the crowd did not disperse. Instead, people began moving closer to Marcus, Bruno, and Bella, drawn by curiosity and genuine admiration for what they had just witnessed. A young mother approached first, kneeling down carefully to Bruno's level. "Would it be okay if my daughter petted your brave dog?" she asked Marcus with a warm smile. Her little girl, who had been hiding behind her mother's legs during the confrontation, now stepped forward with wide, curious eyes. "Of course," Marcus said gently. "Bruno loves meeting new friends, especially children." As the little girl reached out her small hand to touch Bruno's soft fur, the three-legged German shepherd's tail began wagging so enthusiastically that his whole body wiggled with joy. The child giggled with delight, and soon other children in the crowd were asking if they could meet both dogs too. An elderly gentleman with a walking cane made his way through the crowd, tears still visible in his eyes from Marcus's earlier stories about the dogs. "Young man," he said to Marcus, his voice shaky with emotion, "I lost my leg in Vietnam 50 years ago. People used to stare and whisper, just like that bully was doing to your dog. Thank you for showing everyone that being different does not mean being less than." Marcus shook the veteran's hand with genuine respect and gratitude. "Thank you for your service, sir. And you are absolutely right. Different just means special, and both you and Bruno are proof of that." More people continued to approach, each with their own story or words of appreciation. A teenager who had been recording everything on his phone said, "Mr. Rodriguez, I am going to post this video everywhere. People need to see what real strength looks like." A woman who worked at an animal shelter thanked Marcus for being such a positive example of pet ownership and rescue advocacy. But perhaps the most touching moment came when a small girl in a wheelchair rolled up to Bella. The child had been born with a condition that affected her mobility, and she understood better than most what it felt like to be different. "Hi, pretty dog," she said softly, reaching out to pet Bella's chocolate brown fur. "I cannot walk very well either, but that is okay because we are still special." Bella seemed to sense something unique about this little girl, and she gently rested her head in the child's lap, her tail wagging slowly and peacefully. The girl's face lit up with pure joy, and her parents stood nearby with tears in their eyes, grateful to see their daughter connecting with another being who understood what it meant to navigate the world differently. As the crowd gradually began to disperse, people continued to approach Marcus with words of thanks and encouragement. Many asked for photos with him and the dogs, and Marcus graciously agreed to every request. Bruno and Bella seemed to love all the attention, posing patiently for pictures and accepting pets and treats from their new fans. The owner of the coffee shop, a kind man named David, who had watched the entire confrontation from his doorway, approached Marcus with a smile. "Your breakfast is on the house today," he said. "Actually, your breakfast is on the house every day for the rest of the year. What you did here was beautiful, and I am honored to have witnessed it." As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky and the neighborhood slowly returned to its usual peaceful rhythm, Marcus looked down at Bruno and Bella, who were now tired but happy from all the excitement and attention. They had started their walk as just a man and his two rescue dogs, but they were ending it as heroes who had taught an entire community about the power of love, acceptance, and standing up for what is right. "Come on, you two," Marcus said with a smile, gently tugging on their leashes. "Let us go home and get you some well-deserved treats. You have had quite an adventure today." As they walked away from the coffee shop, several people called out final words of thanks and encouragement. Bruno hopped along happily on his three legs, his chest puffed out with pride, as if he knew he had been the star of something important. Bella walked close to Marcus's side, her sensitive nose still picking up the lingering sense of all the new friends they had made. The confrontation that had started with cruelty and bullying had ended with community, compassion, and connection. Jake Morrison had intended to make Marcus and his dogs feel small and ashamed, but instead he had given them the opportunity to show the world what real heroism looked like. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting back with fists, but from responding to hate with love, to cruelty with kindness, and to ignorance with education. As Marcus, Bruno, and Bella disappeared around the corner toward home, The people they left behind were already sharing the story with friends and family, spreading the message that being different is not something to be mocked or hidden, but something to be celebrated and protected. The lesson they had learned that morning would stay with them forever, and many would pass it on to others, creating ripples of kindness and understanding that would reach far beyond that single street in Beverly Hills.